Welcome back to the Teacher Talk podcast, where Paul Kelly and Jay Pollock discuss literature in the high school classroom. We are right in the middle of our Romeo and Juliet series. We did an introduction. We did Act 1. This is Act 2 of our Romeo and Juliet close analysis. Big questions, big scenes, big characters to think about as you go into teaching Romeo and Juliet. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoy. All right, do you want to start us off with a poem today, Jay?
Sure. This is Tony Hoagland's one of my favorite contemporary poets. He actually just passed away a couple of years ago. This is his collection called Unincorporated Persons in the Late Honda Dynasty. And this is a poem about new love, new experiences, and it's rooted in him and his romantic partner watching a nature documentary. So I just thought, since Romeo and Juliet are new loves, this would be a quirky, interesting hook for today. This is called Romantic Moment by Tony Hoagland. After seeing the nature documentary, we walked down Canyon Road onto the plaza of art galleries and high-end clothing stores, where the orange trees are fragrant in the summer night and the smooth adobe walls glow flesh-like in the dark. It's just our second date, and we sit down on a bench, holding hands, not looking at each other. And if I were a bull penguin right now, I would lean over and vomit softly into the mouth of my beloved. And if I were a peacock, I'd flex my gluteal muscles to erect and spread the quills of my Cinemax tail. If she were a female walking stick bug, she might insert her hypodermic proboscis delicately into my neck and inject me with a rich hormonal sedative before attaching her egg sac to my thoracic undercarriage. And if I were a young chimpanzee, I would break off a nearby tree limb and smash all of the windows in the plaza jewelry stores. And if she were a Brazilian leopard frog, she would wrap her impressive tongue 3 times around my right thigh and pummel me lightly against the surface of our pond, and I would know her feelings were sincere. Instead, we sit a while in silence until she remarks that in the relative context of tortoises and iguanas, human males seem to be actually rather expressive. And I say that female crocodiles really don't receive enough credit for their gentleness. Then she suggests that it is time for us to go get some ice cream cones and eat them.
Tony Hoagland?
Tony Hoagland. Totally worth checking out.
The Romantic Moment.
He has my favorite title for a contemporary poetry book. It's called What Narcissism Means to Me. So how do you not buy a book with that title? So anyway, he's worth checking out.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's clickbait you can get behind. I like that. What narcissism means to me.
It's perfect.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Jay. And it is really a go along with the podcast poem because we're talking about love and dating rituals, I suppose, in their essential forms. So this is Act 2 of our Romeo and Juliet series, our series on the play Romeo and Juliet. We did an introductory podcast. We did Act 1 previously. Now we're on to Act 2. We're going to use our same framework that we used for Act 1 for Act 2, which is to ask 3 questions. What's obvious but essential in Romeo and Juliet Act 2? Second, what is subtle but poignant in Act 2? And then finally, what lingering or nagging questions remain for you, Jay, for me, as we continue to teach this book year on year? All right, so let's start off with our first question. What's obvious but essential?
We might have the same one.
Well, I think we might have similar ones throughout. I was thinking that as I was writing mine up, but having not talked to you, we'll just have to find out in real time.
Yeah.
Mine relates to the one I had for Act 1, actually, which was about Romeo being authentic. But I saved Juliet. We didn't really talk about her last time because actually it's kind of the same thing for Juliet. Were you talking about Juliet?
Yeah, I just have the balcony scene in general, but I can't we can't cover and reflect on all of it. So if you wanted to go first and just tell me, tell us what you're thinking about, I can maybe veer off of that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that. I went with Juliet. The obvious, but I think essential is Juliet in this. And the more and more I think about this and teach it, Juliet is enormously important in this play. And in some ways, I think a stronger character, a better person than Romeo. So I had for Romeo in Act 1, the obvious but essential is that Romeo is authentic person. For Juliet, I don't want to use that same word, and I chose another word that might sound a little sickly, but I'm going to go with it. That Juliet is sincere. Mm-hmm. That Juliet is sincere. And I mean it in the best, in the best possible sense. By which I mean, she sincerely feels true love. She feels the passions that she feels, mm-hmm. and she's capable of having that passionate emotional experience. But many people are, capable of being sincere, of sincerely, feeling, sadness or compassion. But what she has also is she's possessed of a resolve. All right, that I think that reality demands of passion. Okay, so I'm going to say, along with it's one thing to be sincere, to sincerely feel bad for people starving in, Eastern Europe.
Sure,
somewhere.
yeah.
There is another thing to realize what that means if you really feel that, right? That means either you have to stop thinking about it, or you're going to need to do something, or stop doing something in your life to address it. Juliet has both of those things, I think. So, 1, she's sincere, truly capable of feeling. 2, possessed of a resolve, that reality, she lives in reality, that reality demands of her passion, and that's what I'm struck by that balcony, by all the back and forth. There's so many striking things in it, but that's what I want to pull out is her resolve. I don't know, does that touch down for you?
Yeah.
Juliet's resolve, like her.
She's in 8th grade, Paul.
Yeah.
She's probably not allowed to go to the mall with her friends yet.
Yeah.
No, you know what I mean? Like, just contextually, I know we're in a different era where people
right.
married young. Like, I get it, but it's just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's significant that she's not in 8th grade. If she were in our 8th grade system, she would not be this person.
Yeah,
but
the parents would have taken the kids away long before the state. I'm sorry, the state would have taken the kids away.
Yeah,
I think.
But I think maybe the line that gets me in this, the line I would go to maybe first for this possessed of a resolve that reality demands of passion, is when you remember that part of the balcony scene when she says, she's apologizing that Romeo overheard her confessing her love. She didn't mean to be. She said, I could be more strange if you want, as I probably should have been.
Yeah.
But I can do that if you want to, but I don't need to. I mean exactly what I say. And she says, trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove to be more true than those that are smarter to be more strange, or wise enough to be more strange. I'm not remembering the line exactly, right? You remember that line? And that's that. You heard me, and maybe that was not the best way for my confession to come out. She admits. But she says, I'll prove to be much more reliable than those that are more cunning, perhaps. So that's maybe the first place I would go to say, to back up that idea that she has this unique resolve. And I can go a lot deeper with this too, because I started thinking about this, and then I started, like every time you start thinking seriously about something in Shakespeare, be it essential or incidental, you have a difficult time finding the bottom of it.
That's excellent point.
So I don't know, sincere, authentic. I added on to that. She's beyond part of how she defines sincerity. She is beyond the reach of forms or of constraints. She almost throws off in her feelings the normal bounds of. Like the first one she starts with is with the name, right? She's like, Romeo, Romeo, wherever are the Romeo? Deny your father, refuse your name. Or if you won't, swear to be my love and I'll do it. I'll drop the Capulet. So first thing that she can drop and still be herself, or even be more essentially herself, is the name and all that goes with that. my family identity, and that's her history too, in a way, right? Her that's found in the family she grows up with. So that's her father too. And I think, we're kind of concerned with those things, like those in our time we talk about stories. We talk about external markers, race is big. We're talking about that, right? How much I fit into that container, how much that's definitive of me, gender, sexual orientation or practice, right? These are the containers, that we're all in. Instead of adding herself into more of those, she shows herself able to be herself by she can remove each of those containers, actually. And be more more authentically herself or more deeply herself by peeling off these layers. It's not of an onion because there's something inside there. And I think it's a self. When I started down this path, the word self appears, several times. So she has this almost supernatural, that's probably going too far, but this ability to stand outside of herself, which made me think of the word ecstasy. We're in a scene of, impending, erotic connection. So the word ecstasy suggests itself, but I believe that word means literally the standing outside of oneself, right? Yep. To stand outside of. And so she is heading toward this, not just in a in a sexual sense, but in like a full entire sense of Romeo is taking her outside of all the little things that she's contained in, the little Russian nesting dolls. She's opening them up and opening them up.
And it seems like you're describing she's an early character in Shakespeare's corpus, right? It's an earlier play.
Yeah.
I mean, what you just said to me is the description of his best characters.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't you think? Like that's when people say like, okay, what's Shakespearean about Shakespeare? There's a lot of answers to that. And one of them is what you're saying about his best characters is that their way of being in the world has numerous layers and is infinitely interesting to think about, and one never gets bored by.
Yes. And I think that thing when she says, I could be more strange if you wanted me to. I don't think her concern is to seduce Romeo, which is often what strangeness is used for, right? As a tool of seduction to play, to play the game,
right?
But she's concerned that she'll appear superficial, right, or that he won't believe what she's protecting is not her appeal to him, but the authenticity of her feelings. She's like, no, I'm totally in love with you. We can play any games you want, but I'm it's done.
Yeah,
it's over. But the risk for this character is that I think if I were a fiction writers we run into what I'd say what's harder to do is to strip these externalities off and still have a character of substance, because what remains when she's not when she's not a Capulet and when she's not a person from her time and place, which I think a lot of efforts are being made to remove those from her.
Yeah.
From her identity.
Right.
And they're willing to trade self. So it's she's standing outside of herself and she wants to take on Romeo's self, right? And she wants Romeo to take on herself.
Yeah. He's wildly outmatched here, by the way.
Don't you think so?
I mean, the poor kid. You and I have chaperoned proms, and sometimes this is a lame analogy, but you see this like really mature 18-year-old girl who's basically, I mean, not only looks because she's dressed up, but just is socially aware, emotionally intelligent, put together, can talk to strangers, and her boyfriend, who might be really nice, just as excited about the ice cream for dessert a lot of times. You know what I mean? So Romeo, this is a really terrible analogy, but I'm with you. I love the idea of beyond the reach of constraints, and I feel like that's a huge part of Shakespeare's greatest characters is they live inside of a set of predictable cultural expectations that they're too big for, and so much of the conflict that lives in whatever play that is, those respective plays, has to do with those, stretching against those constraints. I think that's really a good way of putting it.
So there's an obvious bit to it, maybe. I think she's a believable character, Do you think so? Maybe that's what I mean by obvious.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a small feat. You know what I mean? Like I think creating. Okay, I'm going to create a 13-year-old girl who there's no evidence she's ever been romantically interested in anyone. I'll look to like if looking liking moves. She has no idea.
Yep.
There's no Match.com for 13-year-olds in Verona back then. So her main source of company is this nurse who I think loves her, but it's not exactly an enriching presence. So from that, she ends up, going like taking incredible risks. And, this whole scene speaks to her. I just think it's it's an achievement to tell me how the play is going to end and then surprise me throughout the play.
Yes, right.
And I think, some of the stuff you pointed to speaks to that.
Yeah. And she's looking from Romeo, and this I kind of want to, as a part of this, I actually want to pick up on in the subtle but poignant. So I don't want to give that away yet. But
Yep.
but a piece of this is of a related point about this is what Juliet's looking for from Romeo is also himself. For him to be authentically in love with her in exactly the same way, and I think in a very subtle way that, again, I'm going to save this for our next point. She protects that idea. There's something that I haven't noticed for years, and I think it's significant. You can tell me whether you think it is or not.
No.
Related to this, but we know Romeo says the same thing. When she says, "Hey, who's there listening to me?" He's like, "I don't know how to answer this."
Yeah, right.
I don't know how to answer this, but
said every guy ever. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to say next.
I'll say whatever I should say to be yours. And so if that means ditching again, stripping off,
Yeah.
wouldn't he?
Right. I'll get rid of my name. I'll be new baptized. Call me something else. Great.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah,
I'll
right.
change my birth certificate for you.
Yeah.
I'll drive a new car. I'll move
Right.
out of my house. Whatever you want.
I'm all in.
Yep.
And that's the only thing she believes in, because when he says, "I'll swear," I'll swear to it. I'll swear by the moon.
By the moon.
Oh, not that.
Yeah.
But how about just swearing anyway? Let's not swear at all. She says, or if you've got to, because to swear, that's a subtle point. To make an oath is to almost say you need one. Right.
Right. Exactly.
And
it's like
so
a prenup.
That puts doubt on the
In a
table.
way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a good point. I haven't thought of that.
That makes life. I think she has. And in fact, one of the other things I would say she slips out of the bonds of is almost the bonds of language. If you really want to push that, which I do, of course, push this thing of all the things she's slipping out of.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to hear it. She says she wants it to be true. And all right, this is my subtle but poignant point. I keep coming up to it, so I just have to
Just
say
do it.
All
And
right,
I'll go
all
back
right,
and do whatever.
All right, yeah. I mean, Romeo never says it. He never says that he loves her. He doesn't say that. She says that's what she wants. She wants him to say,
Exchange your true love's vow for mine.
Yeah. What satisfaction can you have? Oh, to exchange
Yeah,
true love's
yeah.
vow. Oh, okay. She
Yeah.
says, I've already given mine. I wish I could take it back so I could give it again.
Yeah.
And then when he starts to say it, she interrupts him again. And then she says, okay, 3 words, and then this night will be over.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's the 3 words, I love you, I guess. But he never says it. She says she doesn't allow him to say it. She doesn't want him to say it. She wants it to be true beneath and deeper than speech. Definitely beneath and deeper than a contract, right? Right. That's what she says.
Or hormonal urges, which he's already expressed.
Yes, yeah. Which he puts out. But she wants to. She wants this expression to be deeper than contract, deeper than hormonal urges, and I think even deeper than language, because she cuts him off. She doesn't let it happen. And in fact, the satisfaction that she'll get is that he shows up with a plan tomorrow morning. That's it. But it never actually happens. The exchange of the vows doesn't happen. She says she already did it. He overhears her saying it, but not to him. She's not confessing her love to him. She's saying it out loud to herself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of brilliant.
Right. No, that's good stuff. I might just touch on some stuff in the balcony scene, if that's okay. And some of this might resonate with what you said. Unfortunately, this might be a discussion of two people just agreeing with each other. How terrible.
I know.
No. So I noticed this sort of 5, to me, distinct moments of this scene, and I'm not going to take a long time with any of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first are 2 little monologues. So there's the but soft what light through yonder window breaks.
Yeah.
And it's Romeo sort of just reflecting on the beauty of this person coming out of her window or her house or her porch, however you want to stage it. Mm-hmm. And then she talks and he riffs on the talking. But it's really just this immediate, spontaneous boy in love. Immediate, spontaneous boy in love. And there it is. And she starts talking. And when she starts talking, she's talking about identity. She's not talking about, isn't he handsome? Like, she never says that. Or, it's deny thy father, refuse thy name. And then she goes on this sort of metaphysical set of speculations about where we get our identity. To what extent is our identity wrapped in a name? It's not hand or foot nor arm nor face by some other name belonging to a man. And then the famous line, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. It's one of those Shakespeare bumper stickers that we know because we're just in the world. Right, and it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true.
Yep.
And then, so her first thoughts are identity. His first thoughts are hot girl coming out of a house.
Yeah.
So I find, I'm not judging. I want to resist judging in Act 2 these two teenagers who have very little experience. I just think those differences are interesting to point out.
Right.
Secondly, I think on line 58 of Act 2, Scene 2, she asked the obvious question, who are you? It's page 73 of the Folgers, the one we teach.
Okay, got you.
And he says, she asks who he is, and he says, my name is hateful to myself because enemy to thee. He's covering himself. And then she asks the next obvious question in line 67, how came thou hither?
Yeah.
There's probably a fence. It's a death sentence if our families fight again. My family hates your family. Like, it's a huge risk. Secondly, so in a way, like, that shows her sort of managing the safety of a situation and not reacting totally with her feelings in her heart. I find that interesting. Thirdly, on line 90, and I'm just skipping ahead.
Oh, it's fine.
On line 90, which is on page 75, this is the beginning of the speech that you referred to a bunch of times.
Okay.
So I find this really interesting. And it's not only the conclusions she draws, but the thinking she does to get to them, her thinking out loud. She says, thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek for that which thou hast heard me speak tonight. Because she said a lot. She said her feelings. Fain would I dwell on form. And I'm struck by, she's beyond the reach of forms. It's interesting.
Yep.
Fain deny what I have spoke, but farewell, compliment. Dost thou love me? It's one of those moments in Shakespeare your brain can rest. I always tell my students, like, when Hamlet says, I loved Ophelia, it's like, I know what all those words mean. I'm so excited, right?
Right, because
dost thou love me?
Yeah, yeah.
And what's interesting is thou, as opposed to you, thou is the familiar. The tu and vous from French. Thou is the familiar,
okay.
You is the formal. So they're using a sort of familiar, intimate language. Dost thou love me? I know you'll say yes, because you're like a teenage guy, right? Thou will say I, and I'll take thy word. Yet, if thou swearest, thou mayst prove false. That's exactly what you were saying before. At lovers' perjuries, Jove laughs. Okay, gentle Romeo, if you love, pronounce it faithfully, or if thou thinks I'm too quickly won, and that's what you were talking about before, I'll frown and be perverse and say no, and so you'll woo. Like, somehow this girl who probably hasn't left her room much knows all this. I don't know if she gets like Teen Vogue, whatever the medieval Verona version of Teen Vogue is. But I always wondered reading this in my margin, it says, how does she know this? How does she? It's not like parents in this world, whether it's medieval Verona or Elizabethan London, there's no sense that they had, long relationship conversations. I don't know. So I wonder, how does she know this, right?
Right.
And that's where she says at the end of the speech, I'll be more strange if that's better. Like if playing hard to get is the more appropriate thing. So it's this real, like, amazing, not only self-awareness, but awareness of what is supposed to happen when people like you and I talk versus, like what you're saying, the authenticity of how I'm actually feeling. And those are two different things.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things, 112 down, is she doesn't just get him to propose. She directs, writes, and stage manages the proposal. Swear not by the moon. Here's how you're going to swear. Here's how you're going to do this. And she goes to go in her house, and he says, you're going to leave me unsatisfied.
Right.
So that's how.
And she would end it right there, right? Line 130. That would be the end of the night. Bye.
Done. End scene.
Yeah.
We get to go to bed. So in line 149, it's what you were saying before. 3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If that thy bent of love be honorable, like you're not a scumbag.
Yeah.
Thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow. By one that I'll procure to come to thee. So I'll send you somebody, and you give him the message, he'll get it to me. Mm-hmm. Where? And what this is, I can see my wife doing this, right? Make sure you get a date. Make sure what the date is, the time.
Right.
Put it in your phone, you idiot, because you have no memory anymore. She knows to do this. It's like she's been married to Romeo for 25 years. It's amazing. Where, what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay. She's even aware that a girl marrying a guy means she's property.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what it is, right? She's in this universe, she becomes his, but in a real literal possessive way. And follow thee, my Lord, throughout the world.
Yep.
And the last thing I just want to point out really quickly is there's certain times in horror movies where there's a sound in the middle of the night, and the last thing the person should do is to get up and investigate.
Yeah.
But what's the problem? They don't know they're in a horror movie. That's the whole problem of horror movie.
Right.
So in line 198, sweet, so would I. She says, yet I would kill thee with much cherishing. And I just want to say, sweetheart, you're in a Shakespearean tragedy. Don't say that. That's terrible. Right?
It's like saying I'll be right back.
It's right? Right. You're not coming right back.
I'm just going to come downstairs.
You're getting 3 beers with your friends. So that's my kind of water skiing over the surface. And I guess the takeaway for me is it's just really surprising that she seems to know these things. Okay. And she by far has the agency. I mean, she is managing these moments, not him.
Yes.
He manages the moment to give him credit. He's in the room, in this case, in the yard. He gets there, which is a super risk. So he does do that, which then enables her to direct the rest.
Right. And she asks him, how did you get here? Right? By
right.
whose...
What are you
but
doing?
there's a second time, the other one after the one you mentioned, she says, by whose, at line 84, by whose direction foundest thou out this place? By love, that first did prompt me to inquire.
That's a good answer. That's good.
That's a really good answer.
That's good stuff.
But it also is pointing to the only motivations, the only explanations for what's going on here that just, happened a couple of hours ago, all of which will wrap up before the weekend. Tragically.
This is some weekend. This really is a full weekend.
Where did it all come from? How does this happen? And this is another way in which, I like this. To me, if there's we talk about, you and I have mentioned things like this, like, is Shakespeare somehow trying to handicap himself or give himself a challenge? Maybe one of the, we mentioned, he gives the whole plot away at the beginning and then writes it. What about another challenge of what essentially is love made of, right? Where does it come from? Nobody knows. You can't make it happen. You can't orchestrate it.
Right.
It just falls out of the sky, So it may as well, all of our explanations may as well be Greek mythology, stories of Hecuba and Niobe and whoever, for all the truth our stories have in them. And Romeo says that. So by love, that sounds a little corny, but also the scene is filled with, I think, like essentialist falling in love. Elements, and that is how he found this place. The same person, thing, that prompted him to inquire in the first place. It guided him here. That's how he got there, and he flew over the wall with love.
Yeah, right.
Which is a little corny, but I like that piece. But they're both ready to empty themselves out for the other. I mean, Juliet's "I'll follow you around the world and lay all my treasure at your feet." It goes even further than that. If you think that's a little too self-abnegating or too, I don't know, if she's allowing him to railroad up, she goes even further than that. She's ready to replace herself with the god of her idolatry. Right? And he's ready to do the same.
He's ready to give up his name, his identity. Yeah. So it isn't a completely one-sided thing. They're both sort of feeding off that idea of why don't we just determine to do anything to get rid of any obstacle ever? That's what they're,
Yes, they're both in this ecstasis, this ecstasy of standing outside of themselves and replacing themselves in some weird way with the other self. the only thing that they'll believe in.
Yeah, and to be the sort of person that can be with this beloved.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, it's so intense. It's so stripped down.
Could I throw out, unless you have more to add, can I throw out my surprising or subtle or poignant point? It's short.
Really? Yeah, let's do it.
And this is a big nerd fest. I just find this really interesting. And full disclosure, I learned to look for this from Ben Crystal, the actor. His father, David, is a linguist.
Yeah.
Who has deduced what Shakespeare's original pronunciations sound like. So they do like original pronunciation productions of Shakespeare plays, and it's really, really interesting. He talks a lot about, characters finish each other's thoughts and how the plays are either lines of blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameter, or prose. But when Shakespeare wants you to feel like these characters are connected, he often has them finish lines of each other.
Okay.
So you see it Lady Macbeth and Macbeth after he murders Duncan, and you see it in the opening soliloquy. I think I talked about it in Act 1. Mm-hmm. So this is just from Act 2, Scene 2, and I'm going to read Juliet and Romeo. Sometimes it's Juliet talking first, sometimes it's Romeo. I'm not going to say who. I'm just going to read these lines and just be aware that these are two people talking, but the two little chunks of speech make up one iambic pentameter line.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. No, that's nice.
Now it's incredibly nerdy, and I don't. My students would say, "Do you think he meant to do?" Well, yeah, because he can count to 10. Number one.
Yeah. Okay.
But number two, it's a musical way to show a connection between two people. Absolutely. So here we go. Won't take long. Take all myself. I take thee at thy word. So stumblest on my counsel by a name. What shall I swear by? Do not swear at all. And I'll believe thee if my heart's dear love. So thrive my soul 1,000 times good night. Should I send to thee by the hour of 9? I would I were thy bird, sweet, so would I. And that's just in one scene, hours after they meet. We saw it in the sonnet. It continues. They're in each other's heads.
Wow.
And I just think that's really, really brilliant. And
right.
They're
singing the same song.
They're singing the same song.
Right?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things as teachers, we often shy away from things that look clinical like this. Right. But I just think it's good for students and all readers to know this thing is built in a certain way.
Right.
And it isn't built in a certain way so necessarily we can write papers about it, but it's just because his original intent is to put bums in seats and to make money. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But how else do we notice that people are close? We do pay attention to how they talk to each other. And in a play like this is a way to do, it's not the only way, but it's a way to do that. So I wanted to point that out.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. So that's really your subtle, but poignant. Is there the intensity of their closeness? Is that how you want to? Yeah,
done by sort of how they finish each other's thoughts so musically and so seamlessly. Yeah. I think, like I said in the last podcast, like how a lot of grandparents might, can you go to the store to get milk? I know. I have to get milk. Like they've been around so long, right? They know. Right. But they're doing this hours after they meet, which I find real. I'm not landing on an interpretation of that fact yet. It's just I think when you go to the play and you're not worrying about writing a paper on the play, I think you can feel their connection. Yes. But sort of if you look under the hood of the play, you start noticing, well, he builds it in a certain way so you feel that they're connected. It isn't an accident. There's lots of teenagers that fall in love in lots of stories. This is peculiarly intimate and close and passionate and real fast.
Yes.
So
and for me, what's always on the table, and I think the point you're making helps enormously, is just plausibility, right? Is it believable? And it has to pass that test. All good narratives have to be plausible, believable. And what's happening here is incredible in some ways. So points like that help drive the reader into believing of their connection. That's enormous. So that's good. That's a good subtle point that you'd have to look closely to. And I think we should teach our students to do that, even though, as you say, we may shy away from it, to drive into the text. Mm-hmm. Well, you reviewed a lot of the lines. Mine comes down to, again, my subtle point, but I think is essential, is that Romeo never says that he loves her. He does not confess it. which you see in the lines, line 95, where Juliet asks, "Dost thou love me?" That's the question on the table.
Yeah.
Then at line 116, 117, "What shall I swear by?" So he's still trying to say, "Yeah,
Just
I love
tell her you
How
love
can
her,
I
dude.
verify it to you?" She talk, don't swear. "Although I joy in thee, I have no joy in this contract tonight. It's too rash. It's too unadvised. It's too sudden." Right, too, and she's right. Like the lightning, which ceases to be ere one can say it lightens. She's right. She enjoys the interaction with Romeo, the real part. She doesn't enjoy the contract because on paper this looks insane.
Yeah.
All right. So, 2, what shall I swear by? Well, you can swear by yourself, or how about not swearing at all? He never quite gets around to doing it, and then she closes the scene. She says, "All right, we're done. We're done here. 3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If thy bent be love." All right, and then that's it, right? And then the plan, which you laid out, but he never gets around to saying it. And I would say technically, she never says that she loves him to him.
Sure.
She says, "I already said it. I already experienced it, and you overheard me talking to myself about it."
Right.
So it's a cool point. What's the worth of it? What's the value of it? I think to me, it's driving. Again, I have this like essentialist view of this love scene that we're trying to explore. What love is and where it comes from, and it is beneath speech.
Yeah.
In this way, she slips the bonds not only of all these other things, and I mean, if you want, I mean, she's not. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. I mean, she slips the bonds of language. Is there more essential? She realizes the insufficiency of language or the problems with saying it.
Yeah, and I think this is a conversation that could be numerous hours long. I think what's interesting to me about what you just said is that the play opens with language devolving into violence in one page.
Yeah.
So suddenly we're in Act 2, and so what we're learning, if our entire experience of romance is in Romeo and Juliet, or of human relations in general, we're learning the malleability of language, right? We're learning that language can lead people to kill each other in a mere moments, or language can make people fall in love because they speak sonnets to each other in their first conversation in mere moments. So this is, and both of those have been put in front of us very early on in this story.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
And maybe, in parallel, the things beneath the language are themselves difficult to pin down. Why, again, do these two families hate each other? Why do their servants fight in the street?
Ancient.
Exactly. There's
no
reason.
one knows.
There's no reason, and it doesn't help to give a reason. In fact, it harms. Why are they in love? How did this happen? Was it sight? We don't know.
Yep.
I don't know. Same. Love and hate.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, you can't. It's very difficult to get out of the balcony scene when you're in Act 2.
Right. Yeah.
Is it possible? What do you have? What else do you have? What do you have for lingering? Do you have some lingering questions from Act 2? What lands for you?
Yeah, I think teaching this to high school kids, and I know you and I teach it to freshmen. Different curricula do different things in the sequence. I think the question of the alternate parents, the Friar Lawrence and the nurse, which take place after the balcony scene. Romeo goes to Friar Lawrence and asks him to marry, and that's a funny scene.
Yeah.
They that stumble that run fast. Slow down. Holy St. Francis, he said. So I think teenagers love judging adults. I think they love judging their parents. I know my kids love judging me. I know your kids are angelic, so that probably never happens, but maybe that's just in my house.
It doesn't. They're loving. They're loving and kind.
They're just thrilled when you come home every day. Tell me about your day.
They're appreciative of my parentage.
So I don't think it's unusual to look outside of your family when you're a certain age for mentoring, and that makes sense. Now, in the world of this play, I think rich people in this day and age, didn't do a lot of the parenting that you and I were expected to do in our spouses when we had kids. So my lingering question is: does Friar Lawrence love Romeo, and does the nurse love Juliet? Because they're the ones that facilitate the marriage. These kids could love each other till the cows come home, but they can't get married without adult help. They can't get married without a priest, number one. They can't get married with. Juliet just can't wander around and go to Starbucks in Verona. So she needs the nurse to sort of remote control her a little bit, or at least to navigate. So that's my question. Is this love? or how would you describe this? So kids, I find, love, like I said, love judging real live adults in their life. So when asking them that question, usually yields some pretty interesting conversations. And I don't know what my answer is. I'm torn because I'm always reminded that these two characters are just people, and they're not reading this play. They have their lives and their experience, and so it's difficult.
Well, that's good. We touched on the nurse, whether the nurse really loves Juliet in our last podcast, and I think that'll come up again.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, in an important way. And I think that is my question, and the question I wrote down without talking to you ahead of time. My lingering question is actually kind of digging into that about Friar Lawrence. Is he a saint or is he a villain? I guess is the way I put this. And related to that is, does he really have, he's a villain if he doesn't, in relation to your question, if he doesn't really love Romeo, if he doesn't have Romeo's good and Juliet's good at heart, you know, in this plan.
He does give a one-line reason, right? That you guys getting married might turn your household's rancor into pure love. Yep. This might be the only shot we have at peace.
Yeah.
So I never know, you know, on the one hand, peace is good, conflict's bad. I get it. Yeah. On the other hand, you're pawning off a couple of teenagers for diplomatic reasons. I don't know, right?
Yeah. He's trying to orchestrate peace and justice in a city, you know, at a town level, whatever it is. The city level. This is the temptation of every politician. It made me think, you can think of him as a politician.
I think you can, yeah.
Who's come in to fix things. Mm-hmm. And every politician knows the right answer, and they're all just about to fix it. And would have, had not the, you know, those meddling kids gotten in the way. Right?
Did you just throw Scooby-Doo into Act 2?
Yeah, I did.
So I hope people are appreciating
that. But it never quite works out.
Yep.
Quite works out that way. And some politicians are, I think, the more honest ones, at least philosophically, are the ones that kind of know they can't, you know, that their job is a little bit different.
They acknowledge limitations.
Yeah, they're more caretakers. Others who are usually radicals of some kind or another don't take that view. They know the right answer, and they know they can enact it. You know, they're going to set things right.
Right. Yeah, Friar Lawrence might be that.
That's that fear I have about him. And part of the reason to doubt him, I think, goes to that line you were talking about. It's Act 2, Scene 3, line 95. When he's still chiding Romeo about Rosaline, right? And she says, "Oh, she knew well. Thy love did read by rote that could not spell." That's a hilarious line.
That's great, yeah.
But, and then the next sentence, but come, young waverer, come, go with me. In one respect, I'll thy assistant be. So right on the heels of saying, oh, she knew. She knew. He says, oh, let's jump in. I'll help you out. And then he starts, even though he is full of wisdom, you know, his opening scene, he throws out, you know, these the antitheses that you find in nature, you know, that even virtue, and it applies to the moral realm, even virtue can become vice, and vice, when paired with the right kind of action, can actually become right. I mean, this is nice, and he is helpful, but he says things that he should follow and doesn't. You know, as you mentioned, wise and slow, they stumble that run fast.
Yep.
And I'll see you here in an hour to marry you to Juliet.
Right.
Like, wait, which? You know, so I think there's something. Yeah, there's something to question there.
Are good intentions enough when you're dealing with volatile kids,
right,
or volatile people,
and when you're dealing with reality? I mean, what he does, we give him a pass for doing because you're on Romeo and Juliet's side, but what he does is pretty awful. You know?
Yeah, and I find as a teacher navigating this conversation is, you know, 15-year-olds aren't thinking like adult parents of teenagers. So I find I have to resist the urge to say everything we just said and to let them talk it out for a while.
Yeah.
Because it looks like, they're empowering Romeo and Juliet to live their best lives and live their dreams.
Thank you, Oprah. Thank you.
Yeah, right. You know, you do you, sweetheart. So, you know, but I think what often happens is the more they have time to think about it, and then as the play unfolds, they realize that love isn't always just following the directions of the person who wants something.
Yeah.
So I think it's messy. I think, and I think it's also important to acknowledge that Friar Lawrence and the nurse have their own stories, some of which we know, some of which we don't.
Right.
They're real people.
Right.
They're figuring stuff out. They live in a city where people can kill each other at any minute. So that's interesting.
Yes. And there's more of those lines that could be troubling if you allow them right at the end of the act, and that'll get us there. I think, scene 6, it's the wedding, which happens off stage, I guess. But Friar Lawrence says these violent delights have violent ends. Yes, they do. And in their triumph die like fire and power. They consume each other. And then he goes on with these other almost Polonius-like little nuggets of wisdom you throw over your shoulder, and they're just worthless. Yep. So I don't know who he's talking to right there. He may be talking to himself, I'm thinking, oh, crap, what am I doing? Love moderately, love doth so. Long love doth so, too swift arrives as tardy. Slow. Nice. But in the
telling
end,
Romeo and Juliet to love moderately is pretty funny.
Right, while he's marrying them hours, hours after they've met, with a view to, some kind of utopian vision of Verona, I guess, just on the horizon.
Yeah.
So that's reason enough to doubt him. So that's a nagging question, because that's not his whole story, as you said. It's not even the whole story that's on the page.
Right.
And he comes through in those important ways, which we'll see in Act 3 in our next podcast. Does that get us there?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. All right. So there's Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Act 2, broken down into 3 big questions. And I think those are good. I think those are good places to go to think about this act. All right.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks
Jay.
Paul.